Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Brumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on Call Center Key Performance Indicators. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen, and I will pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. This webcast typically lasts about 90 minutes, so for those who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time in the United States. Now, I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today, and I want to thank you for that. For those who are not familiar with MetricNet, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas. My role in the company is to manage the call center, service desk, and desktop support benchmarks and client relationships for MetricNet. The work we do for call centers worldwide spans the gambit, from benchmarking and best practice assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the call centers that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve that objective through benchmarking. Since the question of how to benchmark comes up in every webcast we conduct, I want to preempt the question right now and give you just a brief overview of MetricNet's benchmarking lineup. There are three ways that you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, there are what we call peer group benchmarks that compare your call center, service desk, or desktop support performance to that of a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks, and they are very comprehensive in scope. The peer groups are selected from our benchmarking database based upon your call center's scope and scale, complexity, and geography. For example, it's common to select a peer group from your geography and vertical industry, and to also ensure that there is comparability in the number of contacts handled, since call centers are scale sensitive. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the shop selection in the upper navigation bar, and you'll see our call center, service desk, and desktop support industry benchmarks that are available for download. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. The file itself is delivered electronically, of course. What I'm showing on this page is just an excerpt from one of our benchmarking data files. Now, regardless of whether you choose to benchmark your organization, I want to encourage all of you to connect with MetricNet on social media. We are active on all of the major social media sites. We put out a steady stream of posts and tweets, articles, discussions, and presentations that are designed to enrich the community of call center and IT professionals and to provide you with tools and insights and information that you can use to enhance your professional careers. One final note, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of the presentation. This survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 3 questions long, and it takes about 15 seconds to complete. So if you'd do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful. And in return for that courtesy, I'll send you a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. On the agenda for today are 4 items. We're going to start with what I call the customer contact imperative and some key insights into how the call center industry is evolving, not so much tactically, but very much so strategically. Then we're going to talk briefly about where all this data came from, our research methodology, and the origins of our best practices model for key performance indicators in the call center industry. Most of today's presentation will be delivered focused on this area, the model for KPI, key performance indicator best practices, where we've developed a 4-part empirical model that addresses call center performance measurement, diagnosis using benchmarks, prescription or action planning as some people call it, and finally, the implementation of those action plans. And I'll wrap up the webcast with a call to action and give you some pointers on how you can get the most out of today's webcast. So let's go ahead and get started with the customer contact imperative. Now, regardless of which industry you work in, whether it's private industry, private sector, that is, government, a nonprofit organization, you all know that every industry at all times is evolving and changing, and in particular, the competition, regardless of the organization you work in and the industry that you work in, only intensifies over time. Things like consolidation, regulatory compliance. The SOX regulations are now more than 12 years old. The emergence of new business models like virtual businesses, shareholder pressure and budgetary constraints, all of these things combine to make today's industries more competitive than they have ever been before. And in this environment, organizations are always looking for an edge. They're always asking themselves, what can we do differently? What can we do to gain a competitive advantage? And increasingly, organizations are turning to their customer interfaces and saying, there might be an opportunity here, either to deliver better service or, better yet, create a competitive advantage. When you think about it, customer service call centers, on average, have between 7 and 22 minutes of direct contact with their customers in any given year. So you take the institutions that you normally call on a periodic basis. It might be your retail bank. It might be your gas and electric utility. It might be your mortgage provider. It might be your insurance company. On average, you're only talking to each one of those providers from 7 to 22 minutes per year. Now, if you think about it, there's 8,760 hours in a year, yet when you call your mortgage company or your insurance company or your retail bank, you expect on-demand service 24/7, 8,760 hours per year, and you expect to have a stellar experience. From the contact center's perspective, this is a true window of opportunity. It's a moment of truth opportunity. When you think about this, 7 to 22 minutes to make a positive impression on those customers, regardless of your industry, there's a very tiny window of opportunity divided by the total amount of time that those customers are expecting you to be able to deliver service and to deliver exceptional service, that this really does represent a window of opportunity. You can either create loyalty or destroy loyalty. You can build positive word-of-mouth referrals or do just the opposite. You can create repeat customers or destroy repeat customers. You can gain a competitive edge with your customers, or you can lose that competitive edge. And what we want to talk about today is the criticality of this interface and how you turn it not just into a delivery channel for customer service and support, but turn it into a strategic source of competitive advantage, not just for the call center, but for the organization that you work with. And as an increasing number of companies recognize this over the last 3 to 5 years, a new paradigm has emerged, a new business model, if you will, for call centers. The old paradigm viewed the call center as a support function. Some of our clients even told us, well, customer contact is kind of a necessary evil. We have to have it, so we've got it. We would prefer not to. It was viewed as a supplement to traditional brick and mortar facilities. So instead of walking into a retail bank or a AAA office or an insurance, local office of your insurance company, the call center was viewed as a supplement to that. And typically, they were behind the curve. They were reactive. They were playing catch up to customer needs and expectations. The goal in this environment was mere customer satisfaction. The new paradigm is vastly different. What these new paradigm call centers are saying is that we can create value at this interface. This isn't just a way for us to answer customer questions. We can differentiate ourselves here. So we believe that we can create a competitive advantage, regardless of what we're selling or what product we're supporting. We might be supporting computers, insurance products, a retail bank deposit product, a mortgage product, a utility. We can use this as the flip side of the product, two sides of the same coin, the product itself and the service that goes along with that product. Our research shows that increasingly when customers make a decision to purchase a product or a service, that the expectation of the service that goes along with that after the sale will drive that initial purchasing decision. In this new paradigm, the call center is viewed increasingly as a replacement for the more traditional brick and mortar facilities, and the goal is not to be reactive, but rather to stay ahead of customer needs and expectations, to be proactive. And the goal in this environment is not mere customer satisfaction, but something much greater, a much nobler goal, and that is customer enthusiasm and product differentiation. That is how you build a true competitive advantage in this channel. Now, more than a dozen years ago, one of my clients sent this cartoon to me. It reads, delight customers, why can't we just satisfy them like we used to? And the short answer is, satisfied customers are not loyal customers. Satisfied customers are not sticky customers. They don't come back because they want to. They don't propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals. And satisfied customers don't represent a competitive advantage. So what you need are delighted customers. What you need are enthusiastic customers. And as much as anything else, today's webcast is about using key performance indicators to help you drive that competitive advantage in your call center and to help you create those enthusiastic customers. What we have seen in the more than 2,000 service and support and call center benchmarks that we have done over the years is that call centers tend to evolve through 3 stages. Call centers that are new or have not evolved very far tend to operate in the support stage. These are fairly reactive call centers. They tend to be focused primarily on service levels, and oftentimes a chaotic work environment prevails. But at some point, most support stage or reactive stage call centers begin to recognize that there must be a better way to do things, and they begin to make investments in training and tools and technology to become more proactive, more preventive, more strategic. That is, to turn themselves into a source of competitive advantage, to add value on each transaction. And those that are the most successful at making this migration, this evolution, become strategic. Our research shows that, unfortunately, nearly 2/3, or 64% of all call centers worldwide still operate in this traditional customer support paradigm. They operate as a support function, not adding much value on any transaction and simply reacting to customer needs and requests. Another nearly 1/3, 31%, operate in this transitional, some people call it the growth stage. These are the ones that recognize that there has to be a better way to do things, and they break out of this sort of reactive mentality, this customer support mentality, and they begin to make these investments in training and tools and technology. And those who are the most successful at making this evolution become strategic. They become a source of competitive advantage for their parent company. They are not reactive. They are preventive. They are proactive. Their goal is to drive a competitive advantage for their parent company as measured by customer loyalty, things like Net Promoter Score, repeat business, customer loyalty, and growing market share. As much as anything else, today's webcast is about enabling all of you to recognize where you are on this evolution and using key performance indicators strategically to make this migration towards the strategic end of the spectrum, to become a strategic stage contact center as quickly and as efficiently as you possibly can. So let me switch gears now and talk a little bit about where the data comes from that we're going to be presenting in our KPI best practices model. As I mentioned a few moments ago, MetricNet has completed more than 2,000 call center benchmarks over the years. We now have a global database of process and performance indicators that's the largest in the industry. It contains more than 30 key performance indicators, and we have also created a taxonomy. We've cataloged more than 80 industry best practices that address everything from call center strategy, communications, technology, human resource management, and performance measurement. And it's the performance measurement piece of that best practices model that I'm going to be presenting today. Now, the data comes from a whole variety of different call centers. It's not confined to any particular industry. We have data from banks and financial services companies, telcos, health insurance, hospitality companies, insurance and manufacturing, retail, transportation, utilities, and every 3-digit SIC code is represented in the call center data that we have collected over the years. But the key point I want to make on this slide is that what it takes to be world-class, the best practices are largely independent of the industry that you operate in. There is at least 80% commonality from industry to industry. So you go from hospitality to retail banking, or from insurance to transportation, for example. The industry's best practices for running a world-class call center are largely the same from industry to industry. There's at least 80% commonality. Now, as I go through today's presentation, I'm going to use the term best-in-class and world-class somewhat interchangeably, but it does make sense for me to define this right up front. And there's 4 components of this definition of a world-class call center. The first one has to do with quality. You consistently exceed customer expectations regardless of what kind of transaction you're handling. It could be a collections transaction, a customer support transaction, a technical support transaction, an outbound or an inbound sales transaction, but what you're looking for are high levels of customer satisfaction and call quality that is consistently high. But doing so, that quality by itself is not enough. You also have to manage that quality at above average industry level, meaning that your cost per contact is below industry average levels, and if you're in a revenue generating call center, the revenue you generate is above industry average levels. So you're keeping your cost down, keeping your revenue high. That in conjunction with delivering high quality service. So high quality, low cost, high quality, high revenue. And then there are two more subjective factors. Third one, call center follows industry best practices. Now the good news is that the industry best practices are relatively well defined and well documented at this point, and what we're presenting today is just one slice of those industry best practices. The slice that we're presenting has to do with key performance indicators and the management discipline or the measurement discipline of key performance indicators. So are you following industry best practices, which are now pretty well defined and documented? Are you following those best practices? That is the third component of our definition. The fourth component of our definition is that every transaction has to add value. The customer has to come away with a positive experience, which improves their loyalty and their desire to want to do repeat business with you, and it creates positive brand awareness and switching costs. So those are the four components of what being a world-class call center is all about. Now I can define it graphically as shown here on page 18. Let me explain how this chart is interpreted. On the y-axis we've got quality, which would be measured by customer satisfaction. And on the x-axis, we have got cost per contact, which is our efficiency measure. So we've got efficiency versus effectiveness. Now, those metrics are chosen for a reason. They are what we call the foundation metrics. Everything you do in your call center boils down to cost containment and or enhancing the quality of the customer experience. So cost and quality are the yin and yang of running any support organization or any service organization or any call center. Now you'll notice that we've got some representative data points on this chart. Those are the blue circles, the light blue circles. And you'll also notice that there is a correlation between cost and quality. And specifically, as quality increases, cost increases disproportionately. That is simply diminishing returns. You find it in any industry for any product or for any service. As you push the envelope on quality, you go to a higher level quality, the cost will increase disproportionately, and that is what we're seeing here. As quality increases, the cost increases disproportionately. Now, some people ask me, well, gee, is quality driving cost or is cost driving quality? It really depends on your organization. Some companies are very quality driven, and they strive to achieve absolute levels of quality in terms of service levels, customer satisfaction, net promoter score, first contact resolution rate, and so forth. And that focus on quality will drive the cost. By contrast, there are other organizations that are very cost-focused. They are resource-constrained, and the resourcing will drive the quality. So in some cases, cost drives quality, particularly for organizations that are very cost-conscious and cost-focused. In other organizations, quality is what drives cost, and the quality point that the organization hits will dictate what cost level that organization is at. But I want you to recognize here that there are sort of two curves. The upper curve represents what we call the best-in-class performance curve. The lower curve is sort of an average level of performance. Call centers that are operating at an optimal level will be best-in-class. They'll be on this green curve. Some of them spend a lot of money, and they achieve a very high level of quality. Some of them are resource-constrained, and their quality is not on an absolute level that good, but they still manage to deliver the best possible bang for the buck. That's a technical term, of course. The idea here is that being world-class is not about achieving some absolute quality level in terms of customer satisfaction, net promoter score, first contact resolution rate, abandonment rate, speed of answer, or any other metric. Rather, it is about taking the resources you have. I don't care if you're spending $2 a call or $100 a call. It's about taking the resources you have and deploying those in such a way that you achieve the best possible result. So we've worked with call centers that are literally spending $3 or $4 a contact. Yet they manage to eke out a pretty good level of customer satisfaction with those limited resources. They are optimized because they are doing the best they can with those limited resources. By contrast, we've seen companies that are spending upwards of $100 or even $200 per contact, And if they achieve what we believe is possible with that level of resourcing, then they too will be a world-class organization. But you will note the difference between those two call centers, both of which we consider to be world-class. Their absolute performance levels will be vastly different. The key point is this. The level of performance you can achieve is dependent upon the resources you have at your disposal. The headcount, the dollars, the office space, the technology, all of those things are going to drive what level of quality you can expect to achieve. But making a conscious decision about where you are on this curve is fairly important. Most call centers tend to default to some position on this curve, and they don't know why they operate at a particular decision. There's nothing inherently good or bad about being way up here on the upper right, nor is there anything inherently good or bad about being way down here on the lower left. But you do want to make a conscious decision about the trade-offs that you are making between cost and quality, because among other things, you learn something about where you are on the curve. If you're way out here on the upper right, and we frequently find this when we do our call center benchmarks, the implication is that, gee, you can cut costs quite a bit without impacting your quality much at all because you're so far out here on the right of the curve. You can cut your costs by maybe 30 or 40% and have almost no impact on quality. By contrast, we've worked with call centers that are way down here in the lower left, and just a small increase in budget will improve their quality fairly dramatically. Now, most call centers tend to operate on this sort of flat region out here where the slope of the curve is probably around 45% or something like that, or 45-degree angle, I should say, a one-to-one slope. Most tend to operate in that range, but knowing where you are and making a conscious decision about where you want to play on this curve is critically important. As I mentioned, there's nothing inherently good or bad about being way up here or way down here, but you want to make a conscious choice about the trade-off you make between cost and quality, and above all, you want to ask yourself, are you deploying your limited resources in such a way that you are getting the best possible result? Are you getting the biggest bang for the buck? That's what being world-class is all about. It's not an absolute definition of quality or cost. It's about using the limited resources you have to achieve the best possible result. Now that brings us to our first polling question of the day. And as you can imagine, that polling question has to do with the definition that I've just gone through. And here's the question. Do you consider your call center to be world-class? Based on the definition I've just given you, do you consider your call center to be world-class? While you're answering that, and it looks like we're getting good participation, we're already over 50%, I want to thank all of you again for joining us today. We've got a great group of people here. Some of you I know and some of you I've not seen before. So I just want to go through the list and call out a few random names and thank you for joining us. Kara Eichhorn, thanks for joining us. Holly Braid, thanks for being here. Linda Norris, I thought I just saw John Young. I think I did. Yeah. Oh, Jason Young. Okay, my apologies. John Young is on as well. John, how are you? Great to see you here. Patrick, I'm not going to pronounce that right. It starts with a Z, Zanek, I suppose, and Susan O'Shea. Thanks for joining us. I'm really pleased to see you on our webcast today. Okay, most of you have weighed in on this polling question, so let me share the results with you. Given the definition that I've just provided for being world-class in your call center, 25% of you believe that you are world-class, another 58% say no, and then 17% not applicable, presumably because you don't work in a call center or you're not affiliated with a call center. I would say that that result is fairly consistent with what we've seen in recent webcasts. Roughly 1/4 to 1/3 of call centers do consider themselves to be world-class once we present them with this definition. The other 60% to 2/3 do not consider themselves to be world-class. So this is a fairly consistent definition. Hopefully by the time we're through with this webcast, you will have some pretty good insight into how you can use key performance indicators to help make that transition from your current state, if you're one of the 58% who have said no, to what you would consider to be, or what we would define as being a world-class call center. So let's move on in our best practices discussion, and we're going to get into our model for key performance indicator best practices at this point. And I want to start with an expression you've probably heard, which is, if you're not measuring it, you're not managing it. You've heard variations on this theme. Things like what gets measured gets treasured. But there's a lot more to the story than just a pithy expression. Most call centers collect a lot of data, tons of data, sometimes 100 key performance indicators or more. And with today's reporting and call center technologies, ACDs, voice response units, and the like, it's possible to capture an enormous amount of information from the call center. A lot of it is captured automatically through devices like those that I've just described, your PBX, your ACD, your voice response unit. Unfortunately, in this industry, we find that there's really not enough analysis being applied to that data. And as a result, most call centers don't gain much insight from their data. And furthermore, there's really not enough action based upon that measurement. So what we've seen historically is that there's an overemphasis on performance measurement, not much emphasis at all on analysis, even less emphasis on the prescription, that is the action planning. And finally, action, where the rubber meets the road, not much is happening there. This is historically how key performance indicators are used. Most organizations view key performance indicators as a way to merely track and trend their performance. But when they're used only for that purpose, you miss the greater purpose and the greater good of key performance indicators, the real value being in the analytical insights that they give you, the ability to develop action plans, and finally the ability to act intelligently, take intelligent managerial actions and decisions based upon those measurements to enhance your call center performance, to drive towards a world-class level of performance. So the value increases as you move up this pyramid. That's what this arrow is saying. And what we're seeing increasingly emerging in the industry amongst the top players, that is the world-class call centers, is that they've taken this pyramid and they've turned it upside down and they've said, okay, measurement by itself is not all that important, so we're going to de-emphasize that. We're going to identify a handful of metrics and we're going to doggedly track those, but more importantly, we're going to analyze those metrics thoroughly. And we're going to develop action plans based upon that analysis. And finally, we're going to do something with that insight. This holistic approach to managing key performance indicators in the call center is far, far more effective. Small number of measures, a lot of action. You're magnifying the intent and the purpose and the value of those metrics because you are analyzing them effectively, developing action plans, and then, of course, acting on it. It's this holistic approach to managing key performance indicators in the call center that we're going to be discussing today. And our central question is this: how do we turn call center KPIs into a competitive advantage? Better, faster, cheaper? That's not just a cliche. These do represent the three dimensions of competition. Better means higher quality. Faster means quicker turnaround time, shorter cycle times. Cheaper means lower cost per contact. Those are the three dimensions of competition: quality, speed, and cost. So better, faster, cheaper is not just some throwaway cliche. It really does represent the three components of competition and how you can use call center key performance indicators to drive a better, faster, cheaper call center. So our model includes four components, starting with measurement, going to diagnosis, prescription, and then implementation. It corresponds to the four elements here: measurement, analysis, prescription, and action planning. All arrayed around the central objective, not of customer satisfaction. That's a non-starter. That's a waste of time. What you're after is customer enthusiasm, because that's how you create loyalty, repeat business, positive word-of-mouth referrals, and greater market share. That's what we're after. Let me give you a medical analogy here. If you go to your doctor, say because you're not feeling well or for your annual physical, whatever it might be, the first thing a good doctor is going to do is take some measurements. Might measure your blood pressure, your body temperature, might do some blood chemistry work, might do an EKG, might do an MRI, but oftentimes a doctor visit or hospital visit begins with measurement. Now, a good doctor isn't going to look at those measurements and say, oh my gosh, your temperature is elevated and your blood pressure is high, go home and get better, because that doctor hasn't done anything to diagnose what those metrics mean. So a good doctor is going to take those metrics and interpret them. That good doctor is going to diagnose what's going on with you, and based upon that diagnosis, the doctor will prescribe something. Not necessarily drugs, but it could be drugs, but it might also be for a change in lifestyle. Drink less, smoke less, sleep more, for example, de-stress your life. It might be a prescription for surgery. It could be a prescription for a lot of different things. But ultimately, it's up to you to take that doctor's advice and act on it and turn it into something positive in your life to get healthier. And so the cycle continues: measuring performance, diagnosing performance, prescribing actions in the call center that will improve performance, and then implementing those. Each of these components is synergistic and self-reinforcing. You can be great in three of these areas, but if you're weak in any one of the areas, you will not be a world-class call center. By contrast, If you're above average in each of these 4 areas, if you're measuring a little bit better than the average call center, diagnosing a little bit better than the average call center, coming up with action plans a little bit more aggressively than the average call center, and then following through, implementing a little bit more frequently than the average call center, you will be world class. You don't have to be excellent in each of these 4 areas to have a world-class call center. You just have to be above average. And that's the value of this model. It's very synergistic. It's reinforcing. And again, it is all arrayed around the central objective of driving customer enthusiasm. So we're going to go through each one of these components of the model and talk about what a world-class call center looks like. What do they measure? How do they diagnose their performance? How do they come up with action plans? And then what do they do with those action plans? So I'm going to start by separating or creating a dichotomy, if you will, for the 2 types of metrics that exist in the call center. There are operational metrics and business effectiveness metrics. The operational metrics are internally focused. They measure your operational efficiency and effectiveness. They include things like your cost per contact, customer satisfaction, speed of answer, and so on. By contrast, business effectiveness metrics measure the call center's effectiveness in supporting the company's business mission. They're often P&L or revenue related. They tend to be externally focused. Examples would include sales dollars per call center FTE. So if you're in an inbound or outbound sales call center, a common metric would be sales dollars per call center FTE. If you're selling insurance policies, does the average FTE in your call center sell $5,000 worth of insurance product a month or $50,000 worth of insurance product a month? If you're in a collections call center, metrics like the collections dollars per call center FTE. If you're in a call center that is also generating revenue, you could have call center operating expense as a % of call center revenue generated. These are just some examples. Key thing to keep in mind is that the operational metrics are designed to help you run your call center more efficiently and effectively. The business effectiveness metrics are designed to help you align your call center with your company's business mission and drive revenue from a P&L perspective. Now, some of the common operational metrics are shown on this page. This is page 28. There's about 30 KPIs listed here. We've organized them into 6 categories, including cost metrics, quality metrics, productivity metrics, agent metrics, service level metrics, and call handling metrics. Now, there are literally hundreds more. I don't want to leave you with the impression that this is an all-inclusive list of operational metrics for the call center. It's not. It's not even close. I literally have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of different key performance indicators. But if I boil it down to the ones that I see most often, the 25 to 30 metrics that I come across most often in this industry, they are the ones that are represented on this page. Now, if you talk about business effectiveness metrics, these are highly dependent upon the services you're offering. There really is no standard set of measures. They're oftentimes or usually related to product sales, customer retention, and revenue production and/or recovery. There's a lot of room here for creativity in terms of defining and creating these metrics. Now, one of the things we've observed is that business effectiveness oftentimes trumps operational effectiveness. And this reflects a focus on revenue growth and recovery. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that it sometimes allows a bit of sloppiness on the operational side of the call center. In other words, if you have a call center that's producing a lot of revenue, generating a lot of income for the organization, oftentimes the operational side of the call center will be ignored. The operational metrics that I showed you on the prior page. It's not always true, but we have seen on many occasions that business effectiveness will trump operational effectiveness in a call center that tracks both types of metrics. Then there are what we call crossover metrics that cover both operational and business effectiveness. Operating cost as a percentage of revenue generated is a fairly common metric that touches on both operational efficiency as well as business effectiveness. Let me give you a few examples of business effectiveness metrics. If you're in a call center that's handling credit card transactions, things like your cross-sell and upsell conversion rate. Are you able to cross-sell the customer into an identity or upsell them into an identity protection program? Are you able to upgrade them from a green card to a gold card or a gold card to a platinum card, for example, and get more fees from them? Are you establishing payment plans for those customers who are behind on their payments? Number of payment plans established for the rep per week or per month. These are fairly common metrics in a credit card call center. In a collections call center, the ABS, otherwise known as average balance saved, if you're given a $1 million portfolio of outstanding debt and the customers are behind on that debt and you end up recovering $600,000 of that, then your ABS is 60% because you've recovered 60% of that outstanding $1 million. There's also a metric called promises kept. That is, you get a customer to promise to make a payment by a certain date or follow a payment plan over some period of time, and if they keep those promises, the rep gets credit for those promises kept. And it's surprising how much this metric can vary within a given collections call center. Some reps are very good at having their promises kept, while other reps are not as successful at having the promises that are made to them about repayment kept. In a cable TV call center, the number of appointments you scheduled for field reps and the product count for new accounts. Let's say somebody calls up to Comcast or Cox or one of those others, or Verizon Fios, for example, and they say, hey, I want to get cable television. Well, that's one product. If you upsell or cross-sell that customer into the sports channel, into HBO, into movies on demand, and the sports channel, and a bunch of other stuff, by the time you're done with that sale, you might have a product count of 10 for that particular customer. But anything over 1 represents a win for the organization. So I'm just giving you examples here of some of the common business effectiveness metrics. Once again, you can see that they vary by the type of call center you're running. They vary by vertical industry. And again, there's a lot of room for creativity here. I'm going to go back and talk in more detail about the operational metrics. Page 31 here, this is a pretty ugly list. There's a lot of metrics here. And remember what I said very early on in my introductory remarks, which is that there's too much data, not enough analysis, not enough action planning, and not enough action. So I'm going to propose a solution which says we can really boil this down. And when it comes to operational metrics, less is more. Shown on this page are the 6 metrics that really matter. There's cost per contact, and I'm talking about an inbound customer service call center. There's a slightly different set of metrics that you'll be looking at if you're talking about a revenue-producing call center. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to be using inbound customer service call centers as our example. The principles apply equally to revenue-producing call centers, whether you're inbound or outbound. So cost per contact is your efficiency metric. Customer satisfaction is your effectiveness metric. These two in combination are what we call the foundation metrics because, as I mentioned earlier, everything you do in your call center boils down to either cost containment or driving a higher quality customer experience. Now, if you think about that, if you manage a call center, that knowledge, that insight is very liberating because viewed through the lens of cost minimization and maximizing customer satisfaction or the quality of the customer experience, it simplifies a lot of management decisions. So I don't care if you're making a decision about technology, about human resources, about training, about hiring, or about having a beer bash on a Friday afternoon, viewed through the lens of, in the long run, does this help us contain our costs, or does this help us drive a higher quality customer experience? If the answer is not yes to at least one of those questions, then you just don't do it. It's as simple as that. Cost and quality is the only thing that matters. And if you're in a revenue-producing call center, of course, revenue matters as well. But viewed through this lens of cost and quality, that greatly simplifies management decision-making in a call center. Now, if I'm doing a benchmark of an organization and I find out, well, gee, their costs are high or their customer satisfaction is low, I can't just go out there and tweak cost, and I can't just go out there and tweak customer satisfaction, but I do have leverage using the underlying drivers. Call centers are labor-intensive functions. Cost is driven by agent utilization. And if my costs are high, it's usually because agent utilization is low. So agent utilization is the big lever you've got to impact cost. Likewise, in an inbound customer service call center, first contact resolution rate is the big driver of customer satisfaction. So if I want to improve customer satisfaction, I focus my time and attention on improving FCR. There's a lot of ways to do that. You can establish an FCR goal. You can have training that is focused on first contact resolution rate. You can have remote diagnostic tools that enable you to improve first contact resolution rate. You can have knowledge management tools that enable you to improve first contact resolution rate. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. But understanding where the leverage is here is very empowering. Because if you know how to improve customer satisfaction, you can apply force to the lever that enables you to improve customer satisfaction. And if you know that agent utilization is the big driver of cost per contact, then you can apply force here or leverage here to drive a lower cost per contact. The fifth metric on our short list of the metrics that really matter is agent job satisfaction. Now, a lot of people are surprised by this metric because they've never thought of it as being all that important. in the management of a call center, but agent job satisfaction is a bellwether metric. It has a ripple effect across the call center and impacts, at least indirectly, every other metric in the call center. High levels of agent job satisfaction are positively correlated with high levels of customer satisfaction. They're also correlated with lower costs, believe it or not. It's also correlated positively with lower absenteeism and lower turnover. So inverse relationship there. The higher the customer agent satisfaction goes, the lower the turnover, the lower the absenteeism. So agent job satisfaction is a bellwether metric. It has this ripple effect throughout the call center, and contrary to what many call center managers believe, which is that agent job satisfaction just happens, we can't do anything about it, this is a manageable metric. There are things you can do around training and coaching and career pathing that enable you to manage agent job satisfaction and hence morale in the call center. This metric is manageable, and it's worth managing, because if you can keep it at a uniformly high level, it will have a positive impact throughout the organization in terms of higher customer satisfaction, lower cost per contact, lower absenteeism, and lower turnover. The sixth metric, or the fifth metric, is the balanced scorecard. This is really an aggregate metric. I'm going to explain this momentarily, but essentially it rolls together a series of other key performance indicators that are important in the call center, and it creates a single overall indicator of your performance. Now, for those that want to read up on the a little bit more in detail on benchmarking and call center KPIs, we offer a number of white papers on our website. Just go to MetricNet.com. These white papers are always free of charge. You can download numerous white papers on industry best practices, benchmarking, and call center key performance indicators. Now, the first metrics we discuss in more detail are going to be these foundation metrics: cost per contact, customer satisfaction. Remember, everything you do in the call center boils down to cost containment and driving a higher quality customer experience. Think about it this way. On the y-axis on this particular chart, page 34, and by the way, the white diamonds here represent the most recent 100 call center benchmarks we have done. The red diamonds represent a hypothetical locus of points, which would represent world-class or best practices call centers. The y-axis here shows quality as measured by customer satisfaction. Higher quality, the further you go up the axis. Lower quality, the further you go down the axis. The cost axis, or the x-axis, is a little bit counterintuitive. We've got lower cost on the right, not higher cost. We've got higher cost on the left, lower cost on the right. Now, those call centers that are in the upper right are both efficient and effective, and that is the holy grail. If you're running any service and support organization, being efficient and effective really is the holy grail. That's where you want to operate. Those in the lower right-hand corner on this chart have fairly low costs, but their quality is also on the low side. Those that are in the upper left quadrant have high quality, but their costs are also fairly high, and over time they need to be moving to the right to reduce their costs. Those in the lower right quadrant need to be moving up the vertical axis to improve their quality. Those that are in the lower left have the worst of everything. They are both high cost and low quality, and over time they need to be moving up and to the right to both reduce their cost and improve their effectiveness. So you need to be thinking about cost and quality in these terms. What trade-off do you want to make, and have you pushed the envelope as far as you can? Are you operating on this outer perimeter? There are some call centers, as I mentioned earlier, that make a decision that they are going to be driven by exceptionally high quality, and it will be quality that dictates cost. But it is still possible to be below average on cost, even though you're extraordinarily high on quality. By contrast, there are some organizations that make a decision to keep their costs as low as possible, but it is still possible to have customer satisfaction above the industry average while maintaining or managing your costs at an aggressively low level. So think about cost and quality as a trade-off, a yin and yang, but you always want to end up in this upper quadrant where you are on the low-cost, high-quality side, and those that are the most successful in this endeavor end up on this outer perimeter here. They are optimized. They are world-class call centers where they've squeezed all inefficiency out of the system. They may have made a choice to be exceptionally high quality or exceptionally low cost, but there is no slop left in the system. There's no inefficiency to be wrung out of the system anymore. That's what optimization is all about, a two-variable optimization, in this case cost versus quality. Now, I want to go into more detail on the balanced scorecard because we found that this is an exceptional tool for helping organizations understand their overall performance and to benchmark their overall performance. Now, if you think about it, there's a lot of moving parts in any given call center. Even if we boil it down to the KPIs that I've shown here on page 35, you've got cost, customer satisfaction, a productivity metric like agent utilization, you've got your first contact res rate, your agent job satisfaction, and oftentimes these metrics are moving in different directions. The balanced scorecard enables you to answer the question, how are we performing this month relative to last month? How are we performing this quarter relative to last quarter? What is our trend in performance? It's a very elegant yet simple tool that enables you to answer those critical questions. You start by defining the metrics that you want in your balanced scorecard. You'll see here that we've got 6 metrics in the balanced scorecard. Among them are those that we consider to be the most important for a call center. We weight each metric according to its relative importance. Not surprisingly, cost and customer satisfaction collectively receive 50% of the weight. Those are the foundation metrics. We believe those are the most important, so we overweight them. But I'll be the first to admit that these weightings are a subjective call. You can put any metrics you want in your scorecard. You can weight them any way you want as long as the weights add up to 100%. You don't have to follow this formula, but this is a pretty good starting point. The next thing you're going to want to do is show for a representative peer group of call centers that are doing the same thing you are, what is the worst case performance you would expect to see? What is the best case performance you would expect to see? These are typically values that are derived from a benchmark. So we're showing the benchmarking performance range here. You would then put your actual performance in this third column from the right, and you can calculate a score for each one of the metrics in the scorecard using this simple interpolation formula. You take the worst case, you subtract your actual performance, that becomes the numerator of your metric score, and then you divide that by the range, which is the worst case minus the best case. And you're going to end up with a number between 0 and 100%. High numbers, as we've got here for agent job satisfaction, are an indication that you're closer to the best case end of the range than the worst case end of the range. And low numbers, as we have here for customer satisfaction, are an indication that you are much closer to the worst end of the range than you are the high end of the range. So your metric scores will range between 0 and 100%. They would be 0 if you had the worst case performance. They would be 100% if you had the best case performance. But the last step in this process is to multiply the metric score by the metric weighting to come up with a balanced score for each of the metrics in your scorecard. And when you add those up, you come up with a single score. Now, you might look at that and say 54.5%, that doesn't sound like a very good score, but the reality is when we take hundreds of call centers, or literally thousands of call centers worldwide, and run them through this algorithm, the average score is only about 50%, and it's a nice bell-shaped curve. It's a normal distribution. You got tails running off to the right above 70%, tails running off to the left below 30%. So typically, if you're in the range of 50 to 62%, you're in the second quartile. If you're above 62%, you're in the top quartile in terms of overall performance. If you're between 38 and 50%, you would be third quartile. If you're below 38% on the balanced scorecard, you're likely to be a fourth quartile performer. So what I've shown on this page, here's the 54.5% that we derived on the prior page in our example. The average for this group of roughly 100 call centers is 50.2%. That's what this orange dashed line is going horizontally across the chart. The orange bar here, 54.5%, represents the call center that we're using in this particular example. You can see that the scorecard is a great way to benchmark a call center versus its peers, to see how it compares to those peers. The balanced scorecard is a way of sort of levelizing the playing field, the way of creating an apples-to-apples comparison between call centers. The balanced scorecard gives you that single overall indicator of performance that you can also use to track and trend your performance over time. What I'm showing here on page 38, the blue bars represent the monthly scorecard number. That is, this organization updated their scorecard each month. The purple background represents the trailing 12-month average. The last thing the scorecard does for you is it enables you to communicate very eloquently what your overall call center performance is. When you start talking to particularly a layperson and you say, hey, our costs were down last month, customer satisfaction was up, utilization was flat, first contact res rate was down, they're not going to know what all that means, and they're not going to know how to put it together in their head, let alone put together a trend for what your performance is. The balanced scorecard solves that problem for you. It enables you to deliver a single measure of your performance. Most people can relate to that single measure, particularly if you show a trend over time. They know that a positive trend is a positive trend, and they know that if your score is going up, that's probably a good thing. By contrast, if your score is going down, that's probably not such a good thing. Before we get into our next section on diagnosis, let me also point out that one of the most important things you can do with key performance indicators is to use them to track and trend your performance. I don't want to minimize that. Too often what we find is that call centers use KPIs merely to track and trend their performance. We believe that that's only about 5% of the total value of your key performance indicators, but I don't want to forget this important thing, which is using them to track and trend your performance. But really what the point of this slide is to say that you ought to post your performance in an obvious place, in a public place. One of the first things I notice when I do an assessment or a benchmark of a call center is whether or not they have posted their performance charts in an obvious location. Is there a big glass case or is there a bulletin board where the call center has posted their performance? The reason I look for that is because it's usually an indication of a culture that says performance is important. We're willing to share our performance with outsiders, good, bad, or indifferent, or good, bad, or ugly, as the case might be. And it is a way of saying performance matters, it's everybody's responsibility, and we will be held accountable for our performance. So tracking and trending is a good thing, but posting your results in a public location is even better because it does demonstrate you're willing to be held accountable, and it does convey an important message to those both within and outside the call center that performance is everybody's responsibility. We've talked so far about performance measurement, and what I want to leave you with there is that less is more. You don't need a lot of key performance indicators to effectively to perform at a world-class level when it comes to performance measurement and management. But now we want to turn our attention to diagnosis. And specifically, the 3 metrics on our short list that we have not yet discussed are agent utilization, first contact resolution rate, and agent job satisfaction. We're going to use a benchmarking case study to talk about those 3 performance indicators. Now, most of you probably know what benchmarking is. I know some of you have actually done benchmarking because you've done it with MetricNet. But for those of you that might not be as familiar with benchmarking, let me briefly describe it. Benchmarking involves comparing the performance of your call center to the performance of a comparable peer group. I emphasize comparable because you can't compare, for example, a 411 call center to a technical support call center. The 411 call center has 12-second handle times. The technical support call center might have 15 or 20-minute handle times. So the comparison has to be done on an apples-to-apples, fair playing field, a level playing field. And that's a whole different discussion in terms of peer group selection for benchmarking. The key thing is to get comparability in scope and scale and complexity and geography. But that aside, benchmarking at its heart, at its root, is a comparison exercise. You compare your call center performance to the performance of this comparable peer group. The more important piece is this, though. When you identify performance gaps, if there are call centers that are doing better than you, they have higher customer satisfaction or better net promoter scores or higher first contact resolution rate or better customer satisfaction, you want to understand how they achieve that level of performance, because once you understand what they are doing, you can selectively adopt and adapt that within your own organization. So emulating them is an important piece of benchmarking, the goal to build a sustainable competitive advantage. Now, here's the key insight on benchmarking. Given enough time, any call center can achieve world-class performance. The question is it going to take you months or even years to get there? I would submit to you that benchmarking is the most efficient and effective way to blaze a trail, to blaze a path to world-class performance, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to figure it out on your own. You don't have to improve incrementally through trial and error and blood, sweat, and tears. You can bypass all that and build upon the industry's proven best practices and achieve world-class performance, not at an evolutionary pace, but at a revolutionary pace. That's the real value of benchmarking, is that you can bypass all the trials and tribulations associated with incremental improvement because you don't have to invent it on your own. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can build upon the industry's proven best practices and achieve world-class performance at a revolutionary pace. We've actually written a white paper on call center benchmarking, once again, on our website at MetricNet.com. That white paper is free of charge. I'd encourage you to download it. Now, very early on, I used this chart, cost versus quality, to talk about the definition of what it means to be a world-class call center. I'm using the chart here for a different purpose. And the purpose is this, to explain the goal of benchmarking. Most call centers are not optimized. Most call centers do not operate on this upper curve here. Most are down here with some average level of performance. Now, you've heard the expression before, I'm sure, there is no free lunch. But I would submit to you for any function, and this is true of the call center, if you are not yet optimized, there is a free lunch. And benchmarking helps you derive and extract that free lunch. With benchmarking, you can simultaneously reduce your cost while improving the quality of service that you deliver. That's the real art of benchmarking, is that you can get something for nothing. You can wring the inefficiency out of the system and hence cut your costs, while at the same time modifying associated processes in such a way that you are able to deliver a much higher quality customer experience. This is the real goal of benchmarking, is to do it better, faster, and cheaper. Remember, better, higher quality, faster, quicker cycle times, cheaper, lower cost. Well, here's the better piece, moving up the y-axis. Here's the cheaper piece, reducing the cost per contact. Benchmarking enables you to optimize your call center. For some organizations, they simply want to improve their quality and they go vertically straight up. Other organizations want to reduce their cost and they go horizontally straight to the left. Most are able to realize some combination of both as a result of benchmarking, some lower cost and higher quality of service. And that brings us to our second and third polling questions of the day. And as you can imagine, those polling questions have to do with benchmarking. Let me go ahead and open those polling questions. And the second polling question of the day is this: have you benchmarked your call center within the past year? Have you benchmarked your call center within the past year? And while you're filling that out, once again, I just want to say hello to a few people who've joined us today. Alkani Smith, great to see you here. Thanks for joining. Carla Suka, thank you for being here. Great to see you. Robert Murray, thanks for joining us. Stacy Rossiter, great to see you here. Toby Doan, glad you could join us today. Wanda Barr, thank you so much. Okay, about 80% of you have weighed in on this. If you'd like to vote, and the question is, have you benchmarked your call center within the past year? I'll give you another couple seconds here. We've got more than 90% participation in this particular poll. So let me go ahead and close that down and share the results with you. Here's what they say. 30% of you have benchmarked your call center within the past year. That's good. That's more than we normally see. Normally we get 20 to 25% having benchmarked within the past year. Another 53% have not benchmarked within the past year, and then 16%, which is roughly the NAs from the last poll, are not affiliated with a call center, don't work in a call center. So this result, we're getting, over time it's improving. 30% of you have benchmarked within the past year, 53% of you have not benchmarked within the past year. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a related poll, and the related poll is this: do you plan to benchmark your call center in the future? And this is our final poll of the day. Do you plan to benchmark your call center in the future? By the way, in about 5 minutes, I'm going to pause and answer the questions that are queued up. Looks like we got quite a few questions queued up. If you have a question about the material that's been presented so far, please type it into the dialog box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And I will pause again in a few minutes here, and I'll answer those questions. Any questions that don't get answered in the next Q&A, I will answer at the conclusion of the webcast. Okay, if you want to weigh in on this, please do so. Do you plan to benchmark your call center in the future? Let me go ahead and share those results with you. Okay, 9% are planning to benchmark within the next 90 days, 11% within the next 6 months, 35% within the next year, and 23% have no plans to benchmark at this time, and then 23% not applicable, presumably because they're not affiliated with the call center. Now, those that aren't planning to benchmark at this time, I'm hoping that that is roughly the same group in the last poll that said they have benchmarked within the last year, meaning that they've recently benchmarked, and so they don't have any plans to benchmark again. For the roughly 46 plus 9, 55% of those that are planning to benchmark in the next year, I want to encourage you to stick with those plans and proceed with benchmarking. I think one of the things you'll find is that it's probably one of the best investments you can make in terms of the payback. You look at the time and energy that goes into doing a benchmark versus the payoff from a benchmark, I would say it's probably one of the single best investments you can make in the call center. And I would go so far as to say that there is almost a one-to-one correlation between call centers that are world-class and those call centers that benchmark on a regular basis. Now, some call centers are world-class because they benchmark, meaning that benchmarking helps them achieve world-class performance. Other call centers are already best in class, and they benchmark because they're best in class. They want to perpetuate that level of performance. So there's some kind of a chicken or egg thing going on here where some are world-class because they benchmark and some benchmark because they are world-class. But the conclusion is the same either way, which is that there's almost a one-to-one correlation between call centers that are world-class and call centers that benchmark on an annual basis. So for those of you that are considering benchmarking, and it's the majority of you planning to benchmark within the next year, I do want to encourage you to go through with those plans, stick with them, because I think you'll find it's probably one of the most effective exercises that you can engage in order to dramatically improve your call center performance. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down, and we're going to move on in our best practices discussion. What I'm presenting here on page 46 is some benchmarking data from a technical support call center. It's a call center, but it does focus on technical support. And I'm showing some metrics here, some benchmarking data, and we're going to use this benchmarking data and a case study to talk about the other three performance indicators. Remember, those performance indicators that we're going to be discussing are agent utilization, first contact resolution rate, and agent job satisfaction. So the first thing I do whenever I evaluate a call center's performance is I go directly to the foundation metrics of cost, in this case cost per contact, and customer satisfaction. You can see that the cost per contact here is around $28, which is significantly higher than the benchmarking peer group. There were about 100 other call centers in this benchmarking peer group. You can see that they're at $28. The peer group was at right around $23. Okay, so that's our first red flag, is that cost is way high. Second thing we look at is the other foundation metric, which is customer satisfaction. And at 63%, it is significantly lower than the benchmarking peer group average of 79%. So we've got problems here. We've got a high-cost, low-quality call center, and we need to figure out why. And that's why we're in this section of the presentation, which is diagnosis, and specifically using benchmarking to diagnose strengths and weaknesses within your call center. So let's start with the foundation metrics of cost and customer satisfaction. They are driven respectively by utilization. Remember, this is a labor-intensive function, and your costs are primarily labor-driven. In fact, half your cost is agent salaries and benefits, and 2/3 of your cost are personnel. In other words, if you add the indirect personnel, the supervisors, the team leads, the workforce schedulers, the QA, QC people, the trainers and whatnot, 2/3 of the cost of a call center is tied up in personnel, salaries and benefits. Half the cost is agent salaries and benefits alone. So agent utilization is a big driver of cost. First contact resolution is a big driver of customer satisfaction. You don't have to take my word for it. Let me show you the data. Page 49 shows agent utilization on the x-axis versus cost per contact on the y-axis. Not surprisingly, as utilization improves, cost per contact goes down. It takes about a 2 percentage point increase in utilization to result in a 1 percentage point decrease in cost. The reason I just mentioned is because agent salaries and benefits represent about 50% of your total cost. So it takes a 2 percentage point increase in utilization to yield an approximate 1 percentage point decrease in cost per contact. What about FCR, first contact resolution rate? Well, as that number increases, so too does customer satisfaction. The blue diamonds here are data points. The red line is the linear regression through the data. You can see here that as the first contact resolution rate improves, so too does customer satisfaction improve. And here the relationship is roughly 1:1. Every 1 percentage point increase in FCR yields an approximate 1 percentage point increase in customer satisfaction. Let's move on now and look at the drivers of agent utilization. Well, service levels, as it turns out, are a key driver of your efficiency, your agent utilization. If we look at average speed of answer, the higher the number goes, the lower the cost goes. That's not surprising, and I'll explain why in a minute. Call abandonment rate, the higher the number goes, the lower your cost goes. Now, there's a mythology in this industry that says, gee, we need aggressive service levels, we need a really low ASA, we need a really low abandonment rate in order to keep our customers happy. But that really is not the case. In fact, if you look at ASA versus customer satisfaction, you can see that at reasonable average speeds of answer, there's no impact on customer satisfaction. Now, the x-axis here is not absolute ASA in seconds. It's ASA as a percent of total handle time. So if you have a 10-minute handle time, 10% of that would be 1 minute. What this chart says is that as long as your ASA is less than 10% of that handle time, you're not going to see any impact on customer satisfaction. So why would you go to a 5-second ASA when a 1-minute ASA is adequate? It makes no sense. So in this industry, this idea that, gee, quick service levels, short speeds of answer, low abandonment rate makes the customer happy, that's not true. And this is showing you that. If we look at abandonment rate, same thing. As long as your AR is a little bit below 10%, say 8% or lower, you're not going to see any improvement in customer satisfaction. But you will see an increase in your cost. This is the dual-edged sword of service levels, is that aggressive service levels don't help you on customer satisfaction, but they do hurt you on cost. Now, the reason we look at ASA as a percentage of total handle time is because customers are smart enough to recognize that when they call a service desk, for example, that has an average handle time of 20 minutes, they don't mind waiting 2 minutes. It's not a big deal because they know that a 2-minute wait time in the context of the total transaction time of 20 minutes is pretty insignificant. They're okay with a 2-minute wait time. By contrast, I'd be willing to bet that almost anybody listening to this presentation today would say that on a 411 call, anything more than a few seconds on speed of answer is unacceptable. If you had to wait 2 minutes on, for a 411 call, you'd probably hang up. You would abandon because your expectation, given that the average 411 call is only 12 seconds long, you expect that call to be answered in 1 or 2, maybe 3 seconds. So customers tend to think of speed of answer in terms of the total transaction time, and they are willing to tolerate a longer speed of answer when the handle time is longer. The implication being that as long as your handle time is less than 10%, or excuse me, as long as your speed of answer is less than 10% of your handle time, you're probably okay. The sweet spot here is really in the range of 7 to 8%. In other words, keep your ASA at 7 to 8% of your handle time, and you will not see you will not be hurt as far as customer satisfaction goes, but you will also not drive your costs up unnecessarily. Likewise, for call abandonment rate, the sweet spot is in the range of 6 to 8%. Keep your call abandonment rate in that range, and you will not see any negative impact on customer satisfaction, and you will also not raise your costs indiscriminately or unnecessarily. So the impact here on the service levels is that you want to keep your ASA in the range of 8 to 9% of total handle time and your abandonment rate in the range of 6 to 8%. That is the sweet spot for service levels. You become more aggressive than that, your costs go up, and if you let the service levels deteriorate beyond that, beyond 10% abandonment rate, for example, or above 10% ASA as a percentage of handle time, you will see a drop-off in your customer satisfaction. So again, there's a sweet spot that you want to try and hit there for both ASA and call abandonment rate. And this is critical because those service levels do drive agent utilization, which in turn drive your cost per contact. So aggressive service levels do drive cost. Let's look now at training hours. This is not just a motherhood and apple pie issue. It does have an impact on your first contact resolution rate, which in turn has an impact on your customer satisfaction. Look at new agent training hours on the x-axis here versus FCR, first contact resolution rate. Again, the blue diamonds represent data points. The red line represents the linear regression through the data points. As you can see, more training results in higher first contact resolution rates. Look at annual agent training hours. This is after the first year on the job. How much additional training do you get? The higher the number goes, the higher the first contact resolution rate goes. All these blue diamonds out here on the y-axis, these are organizations that provide no additional training beyond the initial training. The implication here is that training hours are not just a motherhood and apple pie issue. Training hours actually drive customer satisfaction by improving your first contact resolution rate. And it's true for both new agents and seasoned or veteran agents. Let's look now at agent satisfaction. I mentioned very early on that this is a bellwether metric. It has a ripple effect throughout the organization, has a positive impact on many other metrics. Let's look at how agent job satisfaction impacts turnover. The higher the satisfaction goes, the lower the turnover is. Well, that's not surprising. I think that would be intuitive to many people. Again, on this chart, the blue diamonds are data points, and the red line is the linear regression through the data points. Why would we care about turnover? Because turnover is costly. By the way, this industry is inherently high turnover. Last year in North America, the average call center turnover was more than 40%, which says that the average agent in a call center doesn't even last 2.5 years. It's a high turnover business in part because oftentimes the agents are not managed very effectively. I'll talk to you a little bit more in detail about how to drive agent satisfaction and hence agent morale, which helps to reduce both turnover and absenteeism. But turnover is costly because every time you replace an agent in a call center, at least in North America, the average cost is about $10,000. That is to find a replacement agent, to screen them, test them, recruit them, train them, and then of course there's a learning curve associated with that new agent. They're not 100% effective the day that they get on the phones. So on average, the total cost of replacing an agent is about $10,000. That is not cheap. So there's an economic issue associated with turnover in addition to just the knowledge issue. When an agent leaves the call center, they take their knowledge and their expertise and their learning with them. Now, agent satisfaction also is positively correlated with customer satisfaction. Again, you don't have to take my word for it. This is the data. Page 62, blue diamonds are data points. Red line is a linear regression through the data. The higher the agent satisfaction goes, the higher the customer satisfaction goes. Now let's look at training hours and the impact on agent job satisfaction. In fact, there are really 3 big drivers of agent job satisfaction, and those drivers are coaching, that is the amount and effectiveness of coaching, the existence of a formal career path, and training hours. So when we look at training hours, look at veteran agent training hours versus agent job satisfaction, agents respond positively to training hours. The more training they get, the more effective they become, and the higher the agent job satisfaction is. So this metric is controllable with the right amount and the effective coaching. If you've got a formal documented career path, and if you are providing both effective initial training as well as ongoing training, those are the 3 primary levers that you can use to manage agent job satisfaction and hence morale in the workplace. That in turn has a positive impact on customer satisfaction and is reversely correlated with absenteeism and turnover, meaning that the higher the agent satisfaction goes, the lower the absenteeism and the lower the turnover. So that brings us back to our benchmarking data. Remember, our costs were high and our customer satisfaction was low. Now that we understand this cause-effect relationship diagram, as shown on page 65 here, we've got our foundation metrics at the top and all the underlying drivers beneath that. What we've created here is what I call a KPI linkage. This shows you how the key performance indicators impact each other and how they are interconnected with each other. So we know that when the cost is high, oftentimes it's because agent utilization is low. And sure enough, if we look at our agent utilization at 46.7%, it is significantly below this peer group average of nearly 100 other call centers at 53.1%. So there's our first smoking gun. Now remember, oftentimes if utilization is low, it's because service levels are too aggressive. So let's see if that's a problem here. Our speed of answer is 18 seconds. The peer group is at 45 seconds. And our call abandonment rate is at 2.9%. The peer group's at 8.1%. Now, when I asked the director of this service center why their ASA was 18 seconds and their call abandonment rate was 2.9%, the answer I got was the CIO told us to keep the ASA under 20 seconds and the abandonment rate under 3%. There was no good reason for having those aggressive service levels, but this is the mistaken notion I mentioned earlier, which is the idea that aggressive service levels will yield high customer satisfaction. Customers are willing to forgive you an occasional abandoned call and an occasional long speed of answer. What they are not willing to forgive is incompetence as measured by first contact resolution rate. This is what they're not willing to forgive you. If you don't have good first contact resolution rates, if it's not consistently high, customers don't like that. They are willing to forgive an occasional long speed of answer or an abandoned call, but first contact resolution rate, that's what they care most about, is that competence. So the situation here, the diagnosis here was your service levels are too aggressive. You need to back off on those service levels, and you need to attrit. That is, you need to downsize because you've got too many FTEs. The good news is their turnover, well, I guess you could call it good news, their turnover at 30% allowed them to attrit fairly quickly and downsize into a reasonable headcount. Very shortly, within about 90 days after this benchmark was completed, they had downsized by about 7 FTEs. Their ASA went up to about 50 seconds. Their abandonment rate went up to about 6.5%. And we saw their cost drop down to between $20 and $21 per contact. Fairly simple diagnosis. It's not a real complex story. But if you understand how the key performance indicators are connected to each other, how they impact each other, how they drive each other, you are put into a powerful position of pulling the levers that you need to pull to achieve desired outcomes. Now let's look at customer satisfaction. At 63%, it's significantly below the benchmarking peer group of 79%. Remember, the big driver of customer satisfaction is first contact resolution rate. So if we look at FCR, we see it's only 51.3%. The peer group's at 71.2%. We also know from our cause-effect diagram that training hours can have a significant impact on first contact resolution rate. So we look at the training hours. We see that new agents get 36 hours of training. Annually, agents get 12 hours of training, which is significantly below, more than 50% below the benchmarking peer group. So again, the long story is the same as the short story. It was a pretty simple diagnosis. You need to invest more in training, specifically focused on first contact resolution rate. This is what's going to help you improve your performance over time, but you've got to make the investments in both initial training and veteran agent training so that you can achieve higher first contact resolution rates and higher levels of customer satisfaction. Here's a first contact resolution rate. Investments in training, again, a relatively short period of time, over 180 days, they were able to make these investments. New agents began receiving 120 hours of training. Annually, they made a commitment to provide 30 hours of training to their agents. This improved their first contact resolution rate. Within about 180 days, they were up to nearly 80% on first contact resolution rate, and their customer satisfaction rose to almost 90%. So if you understand how the key performance indicators interact with each other, how they impact each other, how they are connected to each other, you're in a very powerful position to pull the levers that you need to pull to achieve desired outcomes. I want to show you just 4 other correlations before we move on to the next section of our best practices model. If you look at annual agent compensation versus collections effectiveness, this would be, of course, for a collections call center, you can see that as the compensation improves, agent effectiveness also improves. The blue diamonds here are data points. The red line is a nonlinear regression through that data. Let me give you an example here. If I'm paying an agent $30,000 a year and I give that agent $1 million portfolio of loans that are behind or past due, that agent on average is going to collect about 60% of that, maybe $600,000. By contrast, if I'm paying an agent $40,000 a year, that agent might collect as much as 70% of that, or $700,000. So by paying the agent an extra $10,000 a year, they collect an extra $100,000 a year. Now, I'm not suggesting that the same agent would be able to do that just because they're paid $10,000 a year more. What I am suggesting is that there's a paradox when it comes to wage rates. And the paradox is this. Oftentimes, the more you pay an entry-level agent, the higher quality, better educated, more experienced agent you will get. And oftentimes, the business outcome of paying a little bit more for that agent more than justifies the extra dollars that are spent on those salaries. So in this particular case, the example I just gave you shows that paying an agent an extra $10,000 a year might net the collections call center an extra $100,000 a year. And this is the wage rate paradox. It shows up in many different types of call centers. The implication is not that MetricNet told you to go tell your boss that you need an extra $10,000 a year, but rather that oftentimes when you are willing to pay a little bit more for an entry-level agent, the higher quality, higher skill set, more experienced, better educated agent produces a better business result for the enterprise. The same thing is true if we look at annual agent compensation versus one of those hybrid metrics that I talked about earlier, operating costs divided by revenue. Again, red line is a nonlinear regression, and we see that operating cost as a percentage of revenue, this would be in a revenue-generating call center, as agent compensation increases, the metric improves. Operating cost as a percentage of revenue decreases. Now, at some point, this curve is going to reverse. I don't know at what point it would reverse, but you can't perpetuate this indefinitely. You can't be paying your agents $200,000 a year and expect this curve to continue going down. At some point, it is going to reverse. I just don't know at what point that would be. Here's a couple of other correlations I want to show you. This is in a financial services organization where the agents are paid per referral to give referrals to the sales department. If they're talking, for example, to a customer who owns a 401k or mutual funds in a savings account or perhaps an annuity, they discover a need that that customer might have for a 529 plan or some other savings or deposit product, and they refer that over to the sales department. You can see that as the incentive dollars per referral increase, the monthly leads that are referred also increases. And then finally, if you look at incentive compensation as a percentage of total compensation, this would be, again, among agents that work in sales call centers. One call center, one data point here shows that 70% of the agent's compensation is incentive compensation. But in terms of unit sales, and this would be for an insurance call center at this particular case, in terms of unit sales, as the incentive compensation increases and becomes a larger percentage of the total package, you can see that unit sales also increase. It's important to understand these correlations because these enable you to make intelligent choices about how you are going to set up compensation systems and incentive systems for the agents that work in your call center. Okay, at this point, I'm going to answer a few questions that are queued up in our Q&A box. So if you do have questions, please type them in right now. And let's see. Let me see if I can start at the top here. Okay. Question from Michael. What kind of best practices for call centers are the most important and from which area? Very early on in the presentation, for some reason I'm not able to read this window very well. For those, let me just open it up again. For those of you who do have questions, please type them in now. For some reason, it's just not showing up. Okay, so Michael, very early on in the presentation, I mentioned that performance measurement and management are the foundation of a world-class call center. More important even than people, process, and technology. Now, you've probably heard that paradigm before. You start with people, you build the processes on top of that, and then the technology is there to empower the people and the processes. But I would submit to you that a foundation or a cornerstone of that, even below the people, would be performance measurement and management. 80% of what it takes to be world-class, 80% in my opinion, is a function of how mature you are in your performance measurement and management discipline. So by focusing on the key performance indicators, by establishing a balanced scorecard, by recognizing that less is more, focusing on the 6 KPIs that I've identified here, by benchmarking at least on an annual basis, that is the path to world-class performance. So when it comes to best practices, my suggestion would be if you haven't focused on the metrics yet, please focus on the key performance indicators because that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck. Okay, from Martin, wants to share the video with colleagues. Yes, you're welcome to do that, Martin. At the conclusion of this webcast, anybody who fills out the brief survey at the end of the webcast will receive a link to the recorded webcast. From Lars, the question is, how do you define agent utilization? Lars, we define agent utilization, let me go back to that particular chart. It's basically handle time multiplied by number of contacts, inbound contacts per agent per month, multiply that by handle time. You add the outbound contacts, multiply that by the handle time, and divide it by number of days worked in a month, which is 21.5, number of work hours in a day, which is typically 7.5 and 60 minutes. The average utilization for call centers worldwide is only about 50%. Most people are surprised by that, but we don't back out vacation days, sick days, administrative days, or anything else like that. That way we measure everybody worldwide the exact same way when we're looking at utilization, and the average, again, worldwide is only about 50%. Okay, question here from Brian. Operate an insurance call center that at present time is operating at about 85% outbound calling. Are there similar types of agencies, call centers to benchmark against? The answer is absolutely. There are a lot of call centers that handle both inbound and outbound. What you didn't mention here is whether or not you're doing inbound, outbound service, inbound, outbound sales, or some combination of inbound, outbound service and sales, or these are some claims management in here. So the fact, okay, all sales, thanks. Thanks for typing that in. Okay, so it's all sales. There are lots of insurance call centers that do both inbound and outbound sales. They'll have campaigns, for example, that drive inbound volume, and then they will have lists of existing or potential customers that they call on an outbound basis. So what you're asking, the short answer is absolutely. There are plenty of call centers out there in your vertical market that do both inbound and outbound sales, customer service, claims, and lots of other functions. Okay, I'm going to move on now in our best practices discussion because I want to make sure that I finish on time. And even though we do have 2 sections of the model to go through, these final 2 sections go relatively quickly, and we should be wrapped up by about just a few minutes after 3:30. We're now talking about action planning, what I call prescription. And what I've got here are 4 charts that look almost the same in terms of colors, but they represent 4 important areas for establishing best practices. There's best practices in performance measurement, human resources, contact handling, and technology. And this was the paradigm I just mentioned. It's not just people, process, and technology. It's performance measurement, and then people, process, and technology. That is the hierarchy, performance measurement management being the most important, because if you don't have a solid foundation there, it's difficult to achieve best practices. Now let me explain how these charts work. You will notice down the left-hand side we've listed a couple of words which are shorthand for a best practice. The center column here, the second column from the left, is a longer explanation of the best practice, and I'm using human resources as an example. Now this is not an all-inclusive list of best practices, but they do represent some of the more important best practices around human resources. So for example, career pathing is a best practice when it comes to call center world-class performance. Career paths have been formalized, they're documented. They often include vertical, like managerial, as well as lateral promotion opportunities. Lateral could mean, you become better at what you do, more technically competent, for example. Performance levels required for advancement are clearly articulated. Agents are encouraged to take charge of their own career and skills development. So the call center needs to develop the career path. The agent needs to take charge. But here's the implication, is that if you look at some of the more important key performance indicators, they are affected by these best practices. That is why I've called this affected KPIs. So if you look at the intersection of any given KPI, say first contact resolution rate, and any given best practice, you will find that there is a cell that is either white, light blue, or dark blue. A dark blue cell indicates that there is a strong cause and effect relationship between the best practice and the key performance indicator. A light blue cell represents a weak cause-effect relationship between the best practice and the key performance indicator. And a white cell indicates little or no cause-effect relationship between the affected KPI and the key performance indicator. So here's how you would use these charts. Let's say you do a benchmark and you find out that your first contact resolution rate is not very good, or your agent turnover is too high. You can go down the column, and anytime you find a dark blue cell, that represents an opportunity, a potential lever to improve that metric. First call resolution can be improved through more effective training. It can also be improved through coaching and feedback. It can also be improved, believe it or not, just by establishing a performance standard. Likewise, if I'm trying to reduce turnover, because it is costly, as I mentioned, recruitment is one way to reduce turnover. If you recruit the right people, you can reduce your turnover. Training is another way to reduce turnover. Having a bona fide, formalized, documented career path helps reduce turnover. And many call centers now have formal retention programs that are designed to minimize turnover. So this chart gives you sort of a cause-effect relationship between some important key performance indicators and some of the more important best practices. Again, I'm using the chart on human resources just as an example, and this is not a complete and all-inclusive list of best practices in human resource management, but it gives you an idea of how these charts can be used to diagnose and improve your performance. Now, you'll notice that the business effectiveness metrics have been grouped over into a single category on the far right here. That's because the business effectiveness metrics tend to move together. By contrast, the operational metrics tend to move every which way. They're not necessarily moving in the same direction. By contrast, business effectiveness metrics tend to move together, and you can see that there is at least a weak cause-effect relationship between all of the business effectiveness metrics and the best practices in human resources we've shown here. And when it comes to training, there's a strong cause-effect relationship between the amount and effectiveness of training an agent receives and the business effectiveness metrics. So these 4 charts can be used as sort of a cheat sheet, if you will. Once you've done your benchmark, you identify your performance gaps. These charts will help you understand how you can close these performance gaps. Okay, one other sort of instance, if you will. I'm going to show you 3 instances of the scorecard. The first instance of the scorecard appeared about 40 minutes ago when I showed you how you could develop a scorecard for your overall call center. Well, this represents a sales effectiveness scorecard. That is, for a call center that is primarily focused on sales, there are some key metrics that you would want to include in your scorecard. Mechanically, this scorecard works exactly like the overall call center scorecard that I showed you earlier. But if your call center is focused on sales, this is an example of a scorecard that you can create for sales effectiveness. And you can do just as we did before. You can use this to benchmark against other call centers that are selling the same product. I don't care if it's airline tickets, hotel reservations, insurance products, or anything else. You can develop a scorecard like this that helps you understand how effectively, as far as sales effectiveness goes, these are business effectiveness metrics, how effective you are versus other call centers that are doing the same thing. So mechanically, this scorecard works exactly like the scorecard we went through earlier. And then in terms of cause and effect, this sales effectiveness diagram shows which key performance indicators drive sales rep satisfaction, which in turn drives sales rep effectiveness, which in turn drives overall sales effectiveness. You will see that there's one additional driver here. Remember earlier when I showed the cause and effect diagram for key performance indicators, one of the things I showed was that agent job satisfaction is driven by coaching, career pathing, and training. Well, for sales agents, it's also driven by compensation. Not surprisingly, if you look at the cause-effect diagram here, you will find incentive compensation one of the big drivers of sales rep satisfaction, and in turn drives sales rep effectiveness, which drives all of the sales effectiveness metrics. Let's turn our attention now to implementation. This is really where the rubber meets the road. We've talked about what you measure, how you interpret those measures using benchmarking, how you might develop an action plan. Now let's talk about how we implement that action plan. What I'm showing here on page 86 is a sample action plan that a client of MetricNet's put together. It's a relatively simple action plan, and it has been kept relatively simple for a purpose because I wanted to use it illustratively in this webcast. But this is really what they ended up doing. Over the course of a year, they had 8 items on their to-do list. They said, we're going to document our call handling standards, implement a balanced scorecard. They weren't surveying their customers, so they started doing that. They created a formal agent career path. They started doing root cause analysis. They put in place agent performance standards. They rewrote their IVR menus, and they started call monitoring using Witness, I think it was. So they started this at the beginning of March, and 10 months later, they had achieved world-class performance. They then put together a chart like this, and this is just illustrative, prioritizing your action plan. We've got 3 dimensions shown here. We've got the impact from lower to higher on the x-axis. We've got the cost from lower to higher on the y-axis, and then the color represents the urgency. So for example, if we look at action item number 1, it's relatively low cost, but has a very high impact, and it's urgent. So this is where you want to focus your attention. You would always want to do number 1 before you do number 8, because number 8 costs way more, and it has less of an impact than action item number 1. So when you think about your action plan, recognize that you can't do it all at one time. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew, so you want to prioritize your action item. You want to focus your action plan, and you want to focus on the big bang for the buck items, those that have a high impact and a relatively low cost, and of course those that are more urgent. Let's not forget that key performance indicators can and should be used to establish performance goals within the organization. What I'm showing here is an example of a call center that established goals around cost, customer satisfaction, utilization, and the like, but they recognized that they had to drive the performance goals and standards down to the individual agent level, because call centers can't be held accountable for anything. They are not a living, breathing entity. The agents can be. And so it's important, if you establish call center goals, and you should, push them down to the individual agent level. Hold the agents accountable for hitting a certain customer satisfaction. Hold them accountable for a productivity metric, number of contacts handled per month. Hold them accountable for call quality. Hold them accountable for first contact resolution. You'll see that the goals differ slightly here. there's a 70% FCR goal for the call center overall, 75% for each agent. That's because they expect some agents might not make the goal, and they want to make sure that the call center overall still achieves its performance goal. So goals are established using performance metrics, but you need to go beyond establishing just call center goals. You've got to push them down to the individual agents. And herein is the third instance of the balanced scorecard. In this particular case, I'm showing you an example of a scorecard that is used to provide feedback to an individual agent within a call center. So you can see that there are 7 metrics included in this agent's scorecard. And 3 of those metrics are fairly subjective, things like teamwork, initiative, and mentoring. Even though subjective metrics can be objectified or quantified, put them on a scale of 1 to 5, for example, 1 meaning you don't do any teamwork, you have no initiative, you're not mentoring anybody, 5 being just the opposite, you're a great team player, you show a lot of initiative, you're doing a great job of mentoring some of the younger agents in the call center. Mechanically, again, this works exactly the same way as the sales scorecard we looked at a few minutes ago and the overall call center scorecard that we looked at almost an hour ago. The point here is that you can create a scorecard for each individual agent. And this objectifies what is otherwise a very subjective process. When you sit down weekly, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually with each agent and you deliver feedback, too often, I've been in on a lot of these feedback sessions, too often it's, yeah, you're doing a pretty good job, keep it up. One thing you might want to do is consider more training, improve your FCR, et cetera. You want to be more specific than that. You want to be more objective than that. And this CSR scorecard enables you to objectify what is otherwise a very subjective process and deliver very specific advice to each individual agent. This particular agent's not doing a very good job with utilization, so that agent would receive feedback in that area. By contrast, they're doing a great job when it comes to mentoring. This score can be used to compare that particular agent to every other agent in the call center. Now, this is somewhat controversial, but an increasing number of MetricNet's clients for both call centers and technical support service desks are posting the monthly agent performance ratings based on each individual agent's scorecard performance. Now, of course, they don't list the agent's name over here. You don't want to embarrass anybody, but this is a very good way of letting each agent know how they are performing relative to other agents in the call center. And for those that are consistently not performing well, chances are they're going to look at it and say, you know, this job probably isn't for me. I don't like it. I'm not performing well. I think it might be time to look at other options. So this is not designed as a hammer. Rather, it's designed as a carrot, not as a stick, but as a carrot to say, here's how you're performing. Now, if you're below average, let's see what we can do to improve your performance. And if you're consistently below average, you really might have to consider other career alternatives. Again, I recognize that this is somewhat controversial to post the performance, but it is a way of driving the accountability, and it gets back to my point about accountability. It's a way of driving accountability down to the individual agent level and of providing very objective feedback to agents on a periodic basis. Let me conclude the webcast by briefly summarizing and then giving you 4 specific things that you can do here almost immediately that will help you improve your call center performance. We've talked about a 4-part model for key performance indicators and the discipline of performance measurement and management. The 4-part model addresses performance measurement, diagnosis, prescription, and implementation. When it comes to performance measurement, remember, less is more. You only need a small number of metrics. If you're an inbound customer service call center, I outlined the 5 metrics plus the scorecard. If you're doing sales or some other activity like collections, there are other metrics that you want to include, but keep the number manageable. 5 or 6 metrics are all you need. Keep in mind that there are both operational and business effectiveness metrics, and you should include a balanced scorecard as part of your metrics discipline. Secondly, you should be benchmarking your call center at least annually. Select an appropriate peer group. We have a white paper on our website that talks about peer group selection for call center benchmarking. Use the key performance indicators we've defined in this webcast. Look for performance gaps. Diagnose the underlying drivers, because if you understand the underlying drivers of the performance gap, you can do something about it. It's pretty simple. Benchmarking will help you identify the underlying drivers of those performance gaps. Thirdly, put together an action plan based on the gap analysis and call center best practices. Go after the low-hanging fruit. You don't have to hit a home run first time you do benchmarking. Do what's realistic in the near term. But here's the acid test that you apply to every single action item on your action plan is that every action should either reduce your cost, improve customer satisfaction, or enhance revenue production. If it doesn't do one or more of those three things, it isn't worth doing. It's as simple as that. Every action on your action plan should either reduce your cost, improve customer satisfaction, or enhance the production of revenue. Finally, put your plan into action, but build buy-in from the start from key stakeholders and assign ownership and accountability to an individual or a team within the call center. Put your performance goals in place, monitor your progress, and you should expect positive measurable results. And I'm talking about in the near term, like 90 days or less, you should expect to see positive measurable results. So let me summarize by saying that performance measurement in the call center should be a holistic discipline. It goes well beyond tracking and trending to produce actionable insight. Near term, your goal should be improved performance. Your ultimate goal, and this is something you can get to in months, not years, should be world-class performance, and I defined what that was very early on in this presentation. Effective performance measurement and management is the key to becoming world-class, and this was the answer to the question just a few minutes ago when one of the viewers on this webcast asked me where to focus time and attention. I would say key performance measurement and management is the place to focus if you want to very quickly improve your call center performance. Oops. Let me get my drawing tool back here. The key to getting results is to take action. For those of you who are old enough, you may recall that Nike had an ad campaign back in the 1990s called Just Do It, where in effect the implication was after you've bought the shoes, the shirt, you've trained, you've done all this stuff, you just have to go out there and do it. And that's what I want to leave you with in this webcast, is that at some point you just have to jump in, start going for it, implement the ideas that I've outlined here, and just do it. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how quickly you can improve your performance and become a world-class call center. Now, in a minute, I'm going to get to the questions that are queued up, that have been typed into the dialog box, and I'll conduct a final Q&A session. But before I do, I want to make a few closing remarks. And specifically, I want to talk about 4 real simple things that you can do to get started and take advantage of some of the insights that you've gained here today. First, I want to encourage all of you to connect with us on social media, where MetricNet puts out a steady stream of information that call center and support professionals may find useful. We have 4 LinkedIn groups as well as a LinkedIn company page. We also have 4 Google Plus communities and a Google company page. We're active on Facebook and Twitter, and we have a MetricNet YouTube channel. In the copy of the presentation itself, we have provided links to all of our social media assets, media pages, and groups, so you can click on those to follow us, like us, etc. Don't forget that we have 5 more webcasts scheduled for this year. Next month, we're going to deliver service desk best practices. In September, best practices in desktop support. October is the economic impact of support, and so on. These webcasts are always free. I want to encourage you to go to our website and sign up. I also want to encourage you to browse through our resource library on MetricNet's website, where you'll find a number of white papers, presentations, and magazine articles on call center benchmarking and industry best practices. And for those who are interested in benchmarking, there are 3 ways that you can complete a call center or IT service and support benchmark with MetricNet. First, there are our peer group benchmarks that compare your call center or IT support group to that of a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. The peer groups are selected from our benchmarking database based upon your criteria. For example, it's common to select a peer group from your geography and vertical industry, and to also ensure that there is comparability in the number of contacts handled since call centers are scale-sensitive functions. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the Shop selection on the upper navigation bar, and you will see our industry benchmarks that are available for download from different geographical areas. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers that want to do their own benchmarking analysis, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Now, you can reach MetricNet in the United States at this phone number, 703-992-7559. You can reach us on our website, fill out a Contact Me form at MetricNet.com, or you can always email us at info@MetricNet.com. Now, for those who have time to stay on for a few more minutes, I'll be answering any questions that you typed in during the webcast. And for those who must exit the webcast at this time, I want to thank you for attending the session. I hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So thank you once again. Let me take a look at the questions that we've got queued up. Okay. All right, if you have any questions, please type them in. Now would be a good time to do it. I want to get to a question from Cynthia. And the question is this: where do you go to find your competitors' best practices in order to benchmark? And again, that's from Cynthia. Thanks for joining us, Cynthia. You don't have to go to your competitors to find the best practices. The best practices are pretty well understood, pretty well documented at this point, and they're pretty easy to find. The harder thing to get is benchmarking data. If you want to benchmark your performance against your competitors, I'm talking about quantitative data, things like cost per contact or sales per agent per month, call abandonment rate, speed of answer, first contact resolution rate, customer satisfaction, net promoter score. Metrics like that are harder to find. I've just outlined 3 ways that you can benchmark if you're interested in doing that. The peer group benchmarks that MetricNet has give you the most comprehensive benchmark. You can also download an industry benchmark from our website, or if you want to do it yourself, there are data files that you can also purchase from MetricNet that would enable you to benchmark yourself. So in terms of finding best practices, that's pretty straightforward. Those are relatively easy to find. You can literally go on and do a literature search and find what the best practices are around any area of running a call center, whether it's human resource management, whether it's strategy, technology. When it comes to key performance measurement and management, what I presented today are the best practices when it comes to performance measurement and management. Okay, there's a question here from Martin. The question is the webcast, is the presentation recorded? And the answer is yes, we do record it. And for anybody who fills the survey out, when you exit the webcast, just fill out that quick survey. We'll be sending you a copy, or we'll be sending you a link so that you can listen to the webcast again or forward it to anybody else in your organization that might be interested in listening to the webcast. So the short answer is yes, we do record the webcast. Question here: how do I get a copy of the presentation slides? I've answered that a few times already, but I'll answer it again. Just fill out the survey when you exit the webcast. It's a real short survey. It's 3 questions. It will take you probably 15 to 20 seconds to answer that. Anybody who answers the survey will get a copy of today's presentation slides. If you have any other questions, please type them in. I will remain on as long as anybody has questions. Okay. I think I've gone through all of the questions at this point, so if you have a final question, please type it in and I'd be happy to answer it. Okay, a question from Damon. When I exit the webcast, the questionnaire did not appear. Okay, I apologize for that, Damon. Not sure what happened, but if you're on the webcast, we have a record of that, and we can send you the presentation. So I'll make sure you get that. From Sean, missed the survey instructions. The survey instructions, Sean, will show up when you exit the webcast. When you get off of GoToWebinar, the instructions will pop up and it will tell you exactly how to participate in the survey. Okay, any other questions? Okay, can you flash the utilization slide for calculating the measurement again? This is from Craig. Yeah, let me go back to that, Craig. Very briefly, measuring utilization involves looking at handle times, number of contacts handled per agent per month, both inbound and outbound. Let's see if I can find that. Here we go. Okay. So here's what you do. You look at number of inbound calls handled by an agent in a month, multiply that by inbound handle time, and you add to that the number of outbound calls handled by an agent in a month, multiply that by outbound handle time. The denominator is the number of days worked in a month, which is typically about 21.5. Number of work hours in a day, typically 7.5, 60 minutes per hour. This denominator will end up being about 10,000 minutes. The numerator is just the workload that the individual agent takes on. The average is only about 50% worldwide. Again, we don't back out sick days, vacation days, holidays, training time, admin time. We don't back any of that stuff out. And that way we get a pure measure of every call center worldwide that's in our database. So this is a relatively easy way to calculate agent utilization. The number ranges from a low of about 18% to a high of about 80%. Again, the average is right around 50%. When the number gets too much above 65%, you start to run your agents a little too hard, and you'll start to see burnout and high levels of turnover and attrition when the agent utilization goes above 65%. So 50 to 55% is a pretty good target number on that, and that's how you calculate it. Again, this will be in the, if you fill out the presentation of results, or excuse me, if you fill out the survey at the end of the webcast, you will receive the presentation of results, and that calculation will be in the presentation of results. Okay, looks like there are a couple of other questions here from Alejandra. Can you provide other examples of business metrics for inbound centers? Yeah, business effectiveness metrics. If you're an inbound center, let's say, for example, that you're an inbound technical support center, first level resolution rate is an important business metric, because first level resolution rate, as opposed to first contact, first level, that is resolving the ticket at level 1, that is a proxy for total cost of ownership. So first level resolution rate for a service desk, which is an inbound technical support call center, is a business effectiveness metric. If you're in an inbound sales call center, it's real easy to come up with business effectiveness metrics. Things like unit sales per agent per month, dollar sales per agent per month, cost divided by total sales in the call center. So depending upon what process you're engaged in, technical support versus sales versus collections, there are going to be different business effectiveness metrics that you look at, Alejandra. If you're in a collections call center, average balance saved, promises kept, for example, those are fairly common business effectiveness metrics. Okay, let's see. Marianne asked the question, what is the difference between agent utilization and occupancy? Interesting, I just wrote a paper on that last week. If you go to our website, a metric of the month, you'll find the latest metric of the month is on agent occupancy, and I talk specifically about the difference between occupancy and utilization. Occupancy is the percentage of time that an agent is actually in customer service mode, that is talk time, hold time, and wrap time divided by the total time that they're logged into the system. So let's say an agent is logged into a system for 6 hours, and they're actually in talk time, wrap time, or hold time for 4 of those 6 hours. That's 4 divided by 6, or 66.7% occupancy. Now, utilization, the numerator for utilization and occupancy is the same. It's going to be the total work time. I just gave you an example. If you're in talk, hold, or wrap mode 4 hours, that's the numerator of both utilization and occupancy. But the denominators of those two ratios are different. For occupancy, as I just told you, the denominator is the number of hours that you are logged into the system. For utilization, the denominator is the number of hours you are at work. So to continue with our example, the occupancy was 4 hours of talk, hold, and wrap time divided by 6 hours logged into the ACD. That's 67%. For utilization, let's say that person was at work for 8 hours. So you've got 4 hours in the numerator, 8 hours in the denominator. So the utilization would be 50%. Utilization is always less than occupancy. Occupancy is only a measure of how productive an agent is while they're logged into the ACD, or while they're logged into the ticketing system, or while they're online. It is possible to have a very high occupancy and a very low utilization. That happens when the agents are only logged in, say, 3 or 4 hours a day, but when they're logged in, they are very busy. So they might be at work 8 hours, but they're only logged in for 3 or 4 hours. They're very busy when they're logged in, but they're at work for many more hours than they're actually logged in. It is possible for a call center to have a high occupancy and a low utilization. And for that reason, utilization is viewed as a better measure of agent productivity than occupancy is. Okay, for Michael, the higher first-time fix, the higher client satisfaction. Industry average is around 70%. What is the highest value you have seen in what kind of a call center or a service desk? I've seen first-time fix, Michael, as high as around 95%. But I need to qualify that by saying that not all technical support desks are created equal. If you're in a desk that's doing primarily password resets and, say, supporting the Microsoft Office suite of applications, it's fairly easy to get above 80 or 85% on first-time fix. It's just not that hard. By contrast, if you're on a service desk that's supporting complex business applications like Oracle and SAP, it's hard to get to that. You know, it's a 60% first-time fix is actually a pretty good number. So the higher first-time fixes tend to be associated with service desks that are providing support for less complex environments and applications. The lower first-time fixes tend to be in those environments that are supporting more complex business applications and environments. The same thing is true when you look outside of technical support, general customer service call centers or claims handling call centers as an example. The higher first-time fixes tend to be in those environments where the transactions are fairly simple and straightforward. If you're in a credit card call center, for example, providing customer service to call center, it's not unusual to get a 90+% first-time fix. By contrast, if you're handling claims like accident claims for vehicles, when people call in, there's almost never a first-time fix. It takes multiple phone calls before you resolve the claim. So, okay. From Catherine, what is an acceptable rate for turnover in an inbound center? Well, that's a hard one to answer. The industry average, as I mentioned to you, is up in the 40s, above 40% turnover. If you're down below 20%, you're doing an excellent job. If you're above 40%, you're not doing a good job there. So I would say that you want to shoot for less than 20% annual turnover. If you're about average for the industry, you're going to be 40+%. If you're way above average, you're going to be in the 60, 80, even 100% or more in terms of turnover. We've seen call centers that have turnover that high. From Katie, can I speak a little about the correlation between customer dissatisfaction with revenue loss or the converse, customer satisfaction with increased revenue? There's definitely a correlation between customer satisfaction and increased revenue. There's also a correlation between customer satisfaction and customer retention. Let's say the customer has an insurance policy that's expiring. Are they going to renew that policy? A lot of times with satisfied customers, the answer is yes. Dissatisfied customers, the answer is no. So there's definitely a correlation between dissatisfaction and revenue loss. Flip that around. Correlation between customer satisfaction and increased revenue or increased market share or increased repeat business. There's definitely those correlations, but they vary dramatically by industry depending upon what you're selling, whether it's an airline ticket, whether it's an insurance product, a credit card, a retail banking product, a mortgage product. It really varies dramatically depending upon what type of product you are offering. But there's no question, we've been able to demonstrate this empirically, that there is a correlation between customer satisfaction and enhanced revenue, both repeat revenue from existing customers and new revenue from prospective customers, and then repeat business from existing customers, and then flip that around to satisfied customers. If they've got a choice, they're walking. They're not going to repeat business with you. So again, it depends on the industry what the strength of that correlation is. The ideal thing is that you want your customers so happy that they propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals, and that brings additional customers in. So in an ideal case, you're not just retaining existing customers, you're capturing new customers and growing your market share by virtue of the quality of support and service that you offer through this channel. Okay, from Randy, are there different benchmarks available for internal help desk versus help desks that support external customers? The benchmarks are done pretty much the same way, but the peer group would be different. If you're supporting an external customer population, the handle times are different. There are a lot of, the metrics are the same that you would look at, but the handle times are different, the FCRs are different, customer satisfaction is oftentimes different, net promoter score is oftentimes different. And you'll want to, if you're going to benchmark a service desk or help desk that is supporting external customers, i.e. consumers, let's say you're supporting consumers for a software product or a hardware product, though they're managed differently than internal service desks are. Typically, if you're supporting an external customer base, you've got revenue on the line. You've got repeat business on the line. You've got positive word-of-mouth referrals or negative word-of-mouth referrals on the line. So my experience has been that when a service desk or a help desk is supporting an external customer base, they tend to be resourced a little bit at a slightly higher level. That is more people, more technology, more tools, better training, et cetera, because the company recognizes what Katie pointed out, which is that if you deliver a high-quality customer experience, that customer may come back and buy from you again, or may say good things about your organization and bring in additional customers so you can grow your market share and grow your revenue base. So oftentimes supporting an external customer, those support desks are resourced a little bit more effectively. Internal service and support organizations tend to be resourced a little less aggressively. But in terms of doing the benchmark, the process is exactly the same. It's the peer group that would differ. If you're benchmarking in a support desk that supports external customers, you want to benchmark against other service desks that support external customers. If you're benchmarking a service desk that supports only internal users or internal customers, you want to benchmark against other service and support desks that support internal customers. From Deborah, is there benchmarking data for federal government agencies? Absolutely. There's benchmarking data for federal government agencies. There's a lot of federal government, there's literally thousands of federal government call centers and everything from the IRS to the Department of the Interior, and that there is data available. If you want to talk about that in more detail and find out about benchmarking federal government organization, I would encourage you to give me a call after the webcast today, and I can point you in the right direction for getting some data from a federal government call center. Are there any other questions? Okay, it looks like I've answered all of the questions that you had. So again, I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to MetricNet's webcast today on unleashing the enormous power of call center KPIs. I do hope you found this session to be informative and insightful. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. Thank you once again. Goodbye now.